Hey everyone, I'm Hans from Render. Welcome back. Today, we're diving in with the Optic to learn how to determine the perfect settings for cutting any material. Whether you're a beginner or a pro, getting these settings right makes all the difference in your projects. Let's start by taking a look at the material that we're working with. The steps of this process apply to whatever material you choose, but for this demo, I've chosen matte board, which is like thick cardstock. It's typically used in picture framing, so you can find it at hobby stores and places that sell art supplies. Plus, it comes in lots of colors. We'll use red for this project. Now, it sounds like matte board has lots of laser cutting potential, but you won't find it in the Optic starter material library. So, how do we figure out what cut settings to use? Well, the first step is to select some parameters for a test pattern. This test pattern will be a grid of small squares, each with a different combination of parameters, which, when you're testing cutting, are usually speed and number of passes. This pattern will help us identify the best combination for our particular material. Let's go take a look at Lightburn to see how we can easily set this up. Now that we're in Lightburn, the first step is to open up the material test window. We'll be using this tool to set up a matrix ranging from low to high for the parameters that we'll be selecting. To start off, if you're working with material thicker than about 1 millimeter, you'll generally be using 100% power for all your test cuts. So your two parameters in that instance will be speed and number of passes. A good way to figure out where to start with these parameters is by finding material with similar properties in the material library. So we'll come back to this window shortly. Looking through the list of materials here, I think chipboard is going to be the most similar to the matte board that we're working with. If we look at the cut settings by clicking on Edit Cut under Vector Cut, we can see that the settings for chipboard are 12 millimeters a second at 100% power with 2 passes. We'll use that as a reference point. Going back to the material test window, I'll go ahead and put in 10 millimeters a second for the minimum speed and 20 millimeters a second for the maximum, adjusting our counts to 5 so we get 5 rows. For the passes, I'll start at 1 and go up to 4 for our maximum, adjusting the counts so we get 4 columns. 4 passes is likely to be more than enough, but that's the idea when you're choosing your ranges. Of course, make sure your base material settings are set up with no start, pause, end times or overcut, and that you're set to line so you're cutting rather than engraving. If we go and look at the preview, our test pattern won't be an even square, but that's okay. I'll go ahead and save this as a preset so we can come back to this and we won't lose these settings when I close this window. Now that our test pattern is set up, it's time to cut. First, I'll be using this smaller piece of material for our test pattern, and I'll go ahead and place it at the bottom left-hand corner of the cutting mat and go ahead and home the machine. I've selected Start from current position, so when I start the pattern, it'll cut relative to where the machine is currently positioned, so that'll line up nicely with where my material is on the cutting mat. I'll go ahead and open up the material test window again, and I'll select our preset that we saved, and I can verify that material position by hitting frame. I've already focused the laser module, so let's start the Optic and watch it cut all the combinations. This might take a few minutes, so we'll speed things up for you. Alright, the test pattern is complete. Let's take a look at the results. We're looking for cuts that go all the way through the material, but have minimal charring and burning around the edges. So we can look and see here that these squares here are not cut all the way through, and then these squares show a lot more burning and charring. Based on these results, I'd say that probably the best settings are around 16 millimeters a second and 3 passes. I can see that those results have very little charring on the edges, and are cut all the way through cleanly. Alright, with our optimal material settings in hand, let's cut a demo project. We're going to cut a stylized playing card design that should look quite nice with this material. And I'll go ahead and load that design into Lightburn. It's an Illustrator file, and first I'll make sure that everything's on the same layer. Select everything and hit layer 01, and then we can apply our cut settings, which are 16 millimeters a second, 100% power, and 3 passes. I always like to open up the window to make sure that there are no advanced settings we need to change. That all looks good. And then we can put the artwork 2 inches from either side in Lightburn, and then we can do the same with our material, lining it up with the cutting mat grid, and then we'll make sure to home the machine and switch over to start from absolute coordinates. Alright, let's place the material as we mentioned, 2 inches from either side, lining it up with the cutting mat grid. Then we'll home the machine. And that's all we've got to do. Let's watch the Optic in action. Alright, the Optic just finished cutting, so let's take a look at the results. It's looking good so far, so let's clear out the scrap pieces so we can get a look at it more closely. That looks pretty good. As you can see, the edges are pretty clean, minimal burn marks, not a lot of charring. Looks like those settings that we chose worked perfectly. Now we should make sure to add this to our Lightburn material library so we can use these settings for the same material in the future. Now in Lightburn, just go to your material library tab and select Create New from Layer and enter a material name, thickness, and a description. In this case, mat board, 1.4 millimeters, and vector cut. And then hit OK, and there you have it. It's now in your material library. So that's how you determine the best cut settings for any material. By running a test pattern and carefully analyzing the results, you can achieve high quality cuts every time. Make sure to look for a part 2, where we'll cover how to determine the best engraving settings for any material. We'll also revisit this playing card design, this time, of course, with engraving, giving it a new spin to produce some pretty striking results. If you have any thoughts or questions, leave a comment below, or contact us directly at hello@render.com. If there's anything else you'd like to see us cover in a future video, just let us know and we'll see what we can do. Thanks for watching, and have fun with the Optic.